Hi, my name is Cindy, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi.
I know how you feel. My friend Rita was supposed to come and share, but she shattered her wrist and had surgery on that. And she's a lot more exciting speaker than I am. She likes to walk around in her pantyhose and burn down houses. And on a big night, I like to sit up. So, if I'm feeling particularly wild, I like to smoke cigarettes. So, I'm not a real active drunk. But I love drama, though. But it's all up here. I absolutely love it. I was watching this concert, I don't know, it was about a year, maybe 2 years ago. It was Michael Jackson, and he was in Budapest or somewhere. And before he came out on stage, the crowd was going nuts. People were jumping up and down and yelling and screaming and crying. And this happened for like a few minutes before he even appeared. And right before he appeared, you know, tons of smoke came up on the stage. And they were even getting louder. And then after a couple of minutes, he came up and he went like this. And they just went crazier. I mean, people were just sobbing and screaming. And then a couple minutes later, he moved to the other side. And then people started passing out. And they showed them carrying, you know, people off on little stretchers. And that's what I want. Every time I walk in the room. I also don't want to do anything for it. So yeah, I love drama. Maybe you saw me stand up for 22 years of sobriety. Got sober when I was 2. It's kind of hard to say you're 19 years old with 22 years of sobriety, but my background is I'm an Eskimo from San Bernardino. There aren't a lot of us. There are none there now. And there were 3 in my tribe, me and my 2 brothers, and I hated that place. It's just awful. It was hot, smoggy, miserable, awful. It's in Southern California, and I felt out of place, and I was out of place. My mother returned to Alaska somewhere I was around the age of 3, I guess, and my father raised me with my 2 brothers there. And he's an alcoholic. He's sober longer than I am right now. But I saw him drinking as I grew up, and he's what we refer to as a periodic alcoholic. He had periods of sobriety and periods of drunkenness. And I remember he drank a lot of Brew 102 and Gallo red wine. And I heard some other speakers say that, you know, that's what I drank when I wasn't drinking. So I identify with that. I like the hard stuff. I like Southern comfort. I like it going down. I like it coming up. I like it over my Captain Crunch with crunch berries. You know. I remember my father is German and Irish. Very fair skin, light blue eyes. And I told you my mother left when I was very young, so I guess I was under the delusion that I looked like my father. And when I went to school, I had a very rude awakening. And I remember all the kids started calling me all these terrible names. You know, they were calling me a Jap and a Chink and all this stuff. And I became very aware of self, very self-conscious. And I hated my slanted eyes. I remember I'd come home and I'd sit on the bed and I'd stretch my eyes out so they'd become round. And it worked. But I started smoking dope and they shrunk right back up. By the end of the party, everybody looked like me. But I hated it. I couldn't stand it. And I was a real tomboy. I did real well in school without really trying. I needed a drink. My emotions are very intense. And by the time, I started drinking at a very early age. The first time I got drunk, I was 9 years old. My father remarried a handful of times. And mother number 2 got me drunk for the first time. I was having a bronchial attack, and she was watching me. My father was gone somewhere. And she poured me a water glass full of some red stuff, and I drank about half of it down, and about 10 or 15 minutes later, I started to feel really good. So I drank the other half of it, and I asked her later what it was, and she told me, well, it's called slow gin. At 8 or 9, I had no idea what slow gin was, but I knew one thing. I wanted more. And I can remember lying in bed listening for her footsteps to round the corner, and I'd start hacking my head off so I could get more of it. I just loved it. My grandmother was very instrumental in helping to raise me and my 2 brothers. She's a very good Baptist woman. Very good. And she has a deep faith that, I think we strive to have here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can remember going to church and I just didn't seem to be getting whatever they were getting from it, and I didn't have any kind of faith or connection to a higher power or anything. And somewhere around the age of 5 or 6 or 7, I don't really know, my next door neighbor started molesting me, and he was in his 60s, and I don't think that made me an alcoholic, but my drinking started around 9, and I drank whenever I could. My father married a few times. We moved from San Bernardino to a more hideous place, and I just was drinking by myself in the field, I'd find liquor in my friend's parents' house, and I'd steal it, and I'd go drink it, and about this time my father was a probation officer handling drunk driving cases. And he and that wife split up, and we moved to Riverside, and he decided one afternoon, he should go to an AA meeting. He was sending all of his clients there, and he should find out what AA is. And he hasn't had a drink since. And I think it'll be 25 years in August he'll have. And then my hell really began. There were no homeless back in the 70s because my father was taking them all in. He had 3 practicing teenage alcoholics at home, and we had a couple of empty bedrooms, and we had a rotating series of newcomers taking couch commitments. And it was hideous. And like any good newcomer, my father quit his job and didn't work for a year. Now, it was just awful. I had lunch today, Joanne, who got the book for 3 days. We were talking about, she was hearing things. And that's the way I was right before I got sober. I just was seeing and hearing things that weren't really there, and it was really kind of hazardous because whenever that happened to me, my older brother would punch me in the face so that I could see clearly. And one time, my dad's sponsor brought over a gunny sack full of dead, plucked ducks. And before my dad took off to his meeting, he filled the bathtub up with water and threw the ducks in there. Well, one evening, I went into the bathroom and something kind of caught the corner of my eye. And it kind of looked like they were ducks. But they looked really relaxed. So I finished what I was doing, I washed my face, and I walked out. And there was my older brother. He was the only one at home besides me. And I didn't say anything. And he didn't say anything. And the next morning I found out there were really genuinely dead ducks there. But I just got real quiet at the end of my drinking. I was getting in trouble at school. I was the kind of kid you weren't allowed to hang out with. And I was put on restriction for life. And but I'd come get your kid out of your window. We'd go to a party, and usually I would get your kid back home. You know, I'd knock on the door and run. But sometimes I would forget to run. And I was just a heartache. One night, my dad sat me down. I had a couple of friends, and they weren't coming over anymore. I had already been in and out of a gang. And gangs back then were not like they are now. But I'm sure you've heard of us. We're the Seven Leafers. And they recruited me into this gang, and the problem was I'm more gang-like when I'm sober than when I'm drunk. When I'm sober, I don't want anything to do with you. I don't like you. I drink because of what it does for you, you know. It makes you tolerable. And when I get the right amount of whiskey in me, I love you. And I love you a lot. I want to throw my arm around you. I want to tell you what you mean to me. I want to talk about the beauty of life and humanity. And I want to weep for hours. And so the problem with the gang was, you know, they were rolling drunks and beating up people. And I would pick them up and coddle them. And so they kicked me out of the gang. So that had come and gone. My friends had come and gone. And weird things were happening to me. One time I came out of blackout. I had my best friend up against the lockers at school, and she had the most frightened look I've ever seen on a human's face. And I just put her down and walked away. And she never talked to me since. I've looked for her many times since then, but you know, all these things were taking place, and my father got his first job at Kellogg Mental Institution, graveyard shift, running the adolescent unit. So it was wonderful. We had a party at our house every night because he went to his AA meeting, he'd go to work, and then he'd come home the next morning. And my brothers and I were drinking, so we had a party all the time. And one particular evening, he didn't have to work. And he sat me down and he told me that he was taking David to an AA meeting. And David was the young man that I had met in Alateen. I went to 2 meetings before they kicked me out for drinking. And but I remember David, he had long blonde hair down to the middle of his back, played the drums, and he smoked Marlboro. Everything I wanted in a man. And I asked my father, I said, well, why are you taking David to an AA meeting? As David was a few months older than I am. He said, well, David's an alcoholic. I said, oh, God, I'm sorry. He says, well, we're going to go hear a man named Chuck C talk. And Chuck hasn't had a drink in 29 or 30 years. Why don't you come with us? And I remember thinking, why would you want to go hear someone who hasn't had a drink in 29 or 30 years? I said, that's all right. I'll have a drink for me and a drink for David. Kind of in mourning for David. And off they went to the AA meeting. My dad didn't have to work that night. And while they were at the AA meeting, two girls came by, hadn't seen him in a while, and they brought a Fifth Southern Comfort with them. And I was talking about how things were going to be different. And they were slightly different. We actually drank out of glasses that night. And I drank mine. I drank what was left in the bottle. And the way I look at things is if you're not done with yours by the time I'm done with mine, I'm rightfully entitled to yours. And I take it. And I knew that I couldn't hold it and sit down at the same time, so I carefully placed it on this, the arm of this couch and chair that were next to each other. And as they sat down, I knocked it over. And I started sobbing, because this was the last of the alcohol. Now, it was not based anywhere near reality. It didn't dawn on me that I could get more or steal more or somebody could bring more. This is the last of the alcohol. And I was just sobbing. I went into a blackout that lasted me 3 days. And I was told later what had happened was that I went down to the college, which was a couple blocks away, to go look for my little brother. I guess I'd had one of those fits of love, because my little brother and I used to get in about, 5 to 10 fist fights a week. And I just loved him that night, so I went to go look for him. And as I was out there, I encountered them. And they are after me. And this time they had a cannon, and they were firing it at me over and over and over again. And I can remember wiping my face, and there were little chips of rock and glass coming out of my face and little streams of blood coming down it. And it was kind of an odd sensation. I was just so drunk and had been drunk for a few days straight. I could feel things physically inside of my face, but it didn't hurt. Anyway, I didn't know why they were firing this stuff at me. And I found out later what had happened was I was just climbing up a real steep hill. I just kept landing face down into the dirt over and over and over. Finally, they got me up to the top of the hill. We were in the alley behind my house, and there was my little brother and his best friend lying against the garbage cans. Their shirts were ripped. They had chains wrapped around their necks, and what appeared to be blood all over the place. And my little brother's best friend's brother was standing there, and he said the gang came by and took care of him. And I just started sobbing. And after a few minutes, they hopped up and said, "Ha-ha, we're kidding." And they, I was drunk. I still thought they were dead. And you can't take grief away from an alcoholic, I was into it. And they were eating the ketchup off their bodies, they were shaking me. I still thought they were dead. So they took me into the house where my older brother was, who began to punch me in the face so I could see clearly. And I took my clothes off, started throwing up, and they just threw me into my bedroom and closed the door. My father came home after the AA meeting, just took David, feeling really spiritual, just heard Chuck C talk. Walked into the house, and there were all these teenagers there, as was the usual case, and my father asked where I was, and they said, well, she went to bed, she's got a headache. And so he walked towards my room, and they threw this teenage barricade in front of my door. And they said, she's got a really bad headache. But he wanted to go give me a kiss goodnight. I guess he'd been reading The Family Afterward or something. And finally went into my room, and he saw me lying there. And I had really long hair then. I'd eaten spaghetti that night for dinner. Hadn't eaten for a while. And so I, kind of was this, had clumps. And I was completely white for the first time in my life. Missed it. And I heard it didn't look that good. My eyeballs were rolling in the back of my head. My father carried me out into the living room and asked everybody, what's going on here? And they said, well, she's got a headache. My father thought I had taken a bunch of pills, and I don't do pills because they're really dangerous. And so they threw me into the car, rushed me over to Riverside Community Hospital, took me into the emergency room. They got ready to pump my stomach, and they thought I'd taken a bunch of drugs, and I really wasn't into drugs. I took amphetamines for a couple weeks because someone gave them to me for free, which is how he got his clientele. He gave them to you for free until you got hooked on them, and then he started charging you. But when you feel like mowing the lawn at 2 o'clock in the morning with a flashlight and scissors, I don't like that feeling, So I didn't take pills that night. I don't take them. I'd been drunk for too many days straight, and my body quit working is what happened. So as they're getting ready to pump my stomach, I sat up and threw up all over my father and the doctor. And I said, oh, F, I'm drunk again. Because I didn't mean to be drunk. Somehow, someone shared it earlier, I can't remember if it was Bobby or David, but I just kept overshooting the mark. There's a there. Somehow I just always slid right past it. And so I said, oh, F, I'm drunk again. I passed back out. And the doctor looked at my father and he said, Mr. Steckdab, I'm sorry, but we're going to put a 72-hour hold on your daughter. She's obviously trying to kill herself, and she's not far away from doing that. And we're going to send her over to Kellogg Mental Institution. They've got a great adolescent unit over there. My father said, I know, I run it, and asked if he could bring me home. Now, I looked like I had been terribly beaten up because of that walk I had gone on earlier. And the next morning I told you that I was in a 3-day blackout. I came out of it 3 or 4 times, maybe for a total of 20 minutes altogether. But the first time I came out of it was the following morning, and I was lying in clean sheets. And as I told you, I had spaghetti, so my hair was kind of hard, and I knew something was wrong. Clean sheets was the first indication. And I dropped to the floor, I crawled out into the living room, and there were all these teenagers passed out all over the place. And they told me what had happened the night before. And they got me into the dining room. They dialed the Alano Club, which is where my father was, because I woke up to him pulling out of the driveway. They got my dad on the phone, and he said, I'm coming home to talk to you. And the next thing I remember is sitting on the edge of his bed. I had no idea what he said. The gist of it was that if I was going to live there, I had to go to AA meetings. And I didn't have a fight in me. And at the end of the conversation, I remember he said, you got to take a shower. And I said, I can't. And I remember he took my clothes off of me and he put me in the bottom of the shower, and I just sat in there curled up in a ball. And I was told the first 2 days sober that I slept in the bathroom with my head either on the floor or wrapped around the toilet bowl. The next time I came to, I remember my father was picking my chin up off the toilet, and he was pouring milk down me. And I had to throw it right back up. And I just looked up at him, and he had tears coming down his face. And he didn't say anything, and I couldn't. And I remember he just put my face back down on the toilet. And the next time I came to, I guess I had not had a drink for a couple days, I don't remember, but I was talking to David, this kid that my father had taken to the AA meeting a few nights before. And David had the steps memorized now. So he quoted them to me on the phone. And he said, you know, in AA, we're not supposed to tell you if you're an alcoholic. It's a self-diagnosis kind of thing, that you have to admit to your innermost self that you're an alcoholic. And that's when your recovery begins. But in your case, I'm telling you, you are an alcoholic. And I'm picking you up with my mother, and we're taking you to an AA meeting. And I said, I'm too sick. And I think literally I was too physically ill that night. Remember, our conversation ended when he told me he was eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the next night, David, his mother Lori, and a man named David, his name was David, came and picked Don. They came and picked me up. And I came out of that blackout for the last time, and they were shoving me in the back of the Chevy Nova. They were taking me from Riverside to Pomona to the Triangle Club for my first meeting. It's about a 45-minute drive. And as my dad was shoving me in the back of this car, he said, they may call on you tonight. I said, well, what do you tell them? He says, you tell them your name and your disease and that you haven't had a drink in 3 days. I said, 3 days? He says, yeah, you haven't had a drink in 3 days. And I couldn't believe it because I can't go 3 days. I mean, 3 days, I am stark raving sober after 3 days. I remember they got me in the back there. I got to that meeting. I was still shaking, still sweating, still throwing up. I kept getting up, running to the men's room and throwing up. I don't remember what they said at the meeting. They went around the table, and I said something. I couldn't even say the word alcoholic. I kept stammering on it. And the only thing I remember was after the meeting, a lady came up to me, and she was clean. And she was dressed nice, and she had makeup on, and she had blonde hair. Her name is Martha. She had a soft voice. And I remember her saying kind things to me. And that's all I remember about that meeting. I just kept going to the meetings, and I didn't hear this. I'm sure you people said it, but I did not hear it. But you are also chemical free. So after I got physically better a little bit, I started smoking pot. I thought you were all smoking pot. That's how you stay sober. And remember, I asked this old timer named Lyle, he had 6 months, if he wanted to go outside at break and smoke this great J that I had in my purse. Lyle's about 6'5" or 6'6", picked me up and stood me on a chair so we could have eye-to-eye counsel at the top of his lungs. And he just started screaming, you know, we don't drink, and not only do we not drink, we do not use drugs, we do not smoke pot, and we seldom shoot heroin. And I just said, don't you think that's a little extreme? And they made me change my sobriety date. That's the date I have now, which is March 10th of 1977. And I don't know, I was so tired when I got here. I got sober 2 months before my 16th birthday. So you can do the math, I'm 22 years sober, I'm 38 years old. But I just was so tired when I got here. My dad said I was 15 going on 92. And I think I was really fortunate because probably the first few months of my sobriety, I was so beaten down, I didn't have a fight in me. I just shut up at the meetings. I have not always been the delicate flower that you see before you. And I always feel sorry for people like Jennifer who have to introduce me because I think, you know, nobody ever says something, you know how some people get up there, oh, this person's so wonderful and I love them so much. Nobody ever says that about me. I'm the kind of person that nobody likes on first impression. I'm the kind of person people don't usually like me until they've known me about 7 or 8 years. And I'm kind of a slow warmer. And that's how I was in the meetings. I just sat there. And in the 70s, there weren't a lot of young people. I got a lot of flack for being there. And I just showed up. Somewhere, though, around 6 months or 9 months, maybe even a year, my ego woke up and didn't give me peace for a lot of years. I told you my emotions are very intense. I didn't stay in any town more than 3 months. I had one floating feeling that came by that I recall, and it was the feeling that I've got to go now. I'd pack up my box and I'd go. And I finally figured out what's killing me is Los Angeles. The fast pace is killing me. So I loaded up my box and I moved to Oregon. And I got there and it was beautiful. I mean, it is quiet, it is blue. You don't know you're alive because you can't feel yourself breathing, but it was gorgeous. I got there and I sat around and I remember looking around going, God, I hate nature. And it's probably, I don't know how long I was sober. I had a job that I'd gotten up there at Sambo's as a waitress, and I was not real people-oriented at this stage in my sobriety. And I can remember folding my arms, tapping my foot. I had to ask, what do you want? Some poor soul would order pancakes. A few minutes later, I'd come back with a stack of pancakes, put it on the table, and they'd say, can I get some butter and syrup? I'd say, you didn't ask for butter and syrup. But it's only because I couldn't put two and two together. You know, if it didn't apply to me personally, I couldn't help you, you know? But they found it necessary to let me go. And I came back to LA. And I came back to my home group that I belong to now, which I had been in and out of since I was 3 months sober. And I remember my friend Tom said, go ask that lady at the door to be your sponsor. And I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. And he says, no, now. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do it later. So he walked me over and he said, Pat, Cindy has something to ask you. So I'm like, all right, will you be my sponsor? And she'd seen me come and go a million times, and I'm still sober, but I had an attitude problem. And she said, come talk to me after the meeting. I had already had 8 sponsors. And after the meeting, when she was talking to me, she said, I'll sponsor you under these conditions. That you make a commitment to me, that you make a commitment to this home group, and that you make a commitment to Alcoholics Anonymous. And under those conditions, I'll sponsor you. I said, okay. I knew I'd be gone in 3 months, so it didn't really matter. So she said, start calling me every day. And she got me a place to live with one of my previous sponsors. And I remember one of our first conversations on the phone. She said, did you unpack your stuff? And I said, well, I don't want to take up that much room. She said, well, how much stuff do you have? I said, well, it's a whole box full. She said, you know, you remind me of myself. Why don't you just go ahead and unpack it? I don't think Janet will mind. And maybe in the 5 minutes it takes you to pack up, when you get that feeling that you want to go, maybe in that 5 minutes, just out of habit, you'll think to call me. She says, you're the type that always leaves 5 minutes before the miracle happens. So I remember I unloaded my stuff and started calling her every day. And I don't know what was different this time than with the 8 previous sponsors. But it started to click for me. I was about 2 years sober. I was more obnoxious and hostile and angry than I'd ever been. So I was prime relationship material. And I started glancing at him from across the room. And the second his girlfriend was in Hawaii, I made my move. She was an Al-Anon. I figured she could just release him. And, just help where I can. And I don't know if you have a couple like this in your group, but we broke up and got back together about 18 times. My sponsor now, Clancy, tells me that I'm addicted to excitement because I love the feeling of falling in love. I love it, you know? You drive to the meeting, you get there, there's all the people you love who work the 12 golden steps. You glance at them from across the room. But the problem is, after a while, the excitement subsides. So I would get a sign from God that says, break up with him. And I do God's will. So I'd break up. Now, if someone sitting next to you just broke up with someone, and they're pretending like they're not enjoying it, there's something delicious about it. Your heart rips, your gut churns. You can listen to sad songs on the way to the meeting, glance at him from across the room, show him what he can't have. Because you never look better than when you're broken up. The problem is the pain subsides. So I get another sign from God that says, get back together. So we did this for 5 years, and he went out and got drunk. Now, fortunately for me, I had a couple things stronger than my obsession for this man, and that was my commitment to my sponsor and to my home group. And I just kept going to meetings, and I guess he was out for about a year, and he came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and we started glancing at each other from across the room, and I got pregnant. That's how I remember it anyway. I had always hated children. I'd hear them cry in restaurants, and I would think, God, why don't they just smack that thing? So I was real nervous as to what kind of mother I would become. And so was everybody who knew me. I remember one Friday night I was sitting in the meeting. I was about 4.5 months pregnant. And I felt this little go right up my stomach. And I screamed. I don't know if you've seen the movie Alien. Something kicked in, and I just started to fall in love with this baby. I mean, just absolutely in love. And I remember, oh yes, I forgot to tell you, so we were engaged for 13 days. We had dinner with our sponsor. Clancy sponsored me, and he said, all right, you're getting married Wednesday before the meeting. So I'm too sick to look for a dress. And he said, all right, you're getting married in 13 days before the Wednesday night meeting. So we did. Got married, went to the Pacific group meeting, and so we were married. I was pregnant. I was terrified. I was probably 8 years sober. And I remember in September I went into labor. We went to the hospital. My husband called the Lamaze list, which consisted of all the AA people we knew. So I'm laying in there, and they started coming in, you know, just all these AA people, and I'm laying there trying to look good. And 16 and a half short hours later, Daniel was born. And when Daniel was born, he came out, he was screaming his head off. And my very first thought was, let me hold him so I can make him feel better. And I'd never felt that way about anything in my entire life. And I started one of the greatest love affairs. And that was on a Wednesday morning, so Clancy excused me that night from the meeting. And we bought a little house and moved out to the suburbs, and shortly after we moved out there, my husband started using again. And he had had 6.5 years at one point, and after we moved out there, he couldn't put any time together. It's a few months here, a few weeks here, 9 months there, and finally I decided that I had to leave that situation, and I was, I think, 12.5 years sober, and it started the most painful period of my life to that point. And so I took my son and I left, and that's prime relationship for another, prime relationship material there. So I started another relationship, and was in that one for 5 years, and that's all kinds of crazy custody stuff. And I noticed in my program there was one thing that I was lacking, and that was a personal relationship with God as I understand Him. And when I was going through that period, I had exhausted self-will and human resources, as our book talks about. And that is necessary for me to establish a relationship with God as I understand Him. And I started going through the steps again as they're laid out in the book. And it started to change my life. I got up to the amends step, and I had, around 100 names on that list that I had to go meet with these people directly. And one of them was my husband, and I remember sitting down with him. And when I sat down to make those amends, I had two lists. I had a list of the harm that I had done him, about that big. And I carried another list in the back of my head, it's about that big, of the harms he had done to me. And I sat down and I talked about this little list over here, and before I was even done talking, that list evaporated. It just didn't even exist. And at the end of our little meeting, he said, next, I'd been with him since I was 17. We were together like 10.5 years, and he said, God, I feel like I don't know who you are. And I just thought, you don't. And somewhere during that amends process, it was really wonderful because I became detached from that person who had done all that harm, and I got a little burst to get through a lot of those amends because I felt like I wasn't that person anymore. I could throw my arms around those people I was sitting with and say, I'm sorry she did that to you. I couldn't live with her either. And I went back to school, so my son and I packed our stuff up and went to Iowa, and I lived in Iowa City for a few years, and we used to come out to Los Angeles during the summer and Christmas vacation so I could be with my home group and friends and family, and Daniel could be with his father, John, and shortly before we came back that last summer, John overdosed, and he got sober again, and so that's going to kind of blow the summer for my son because we had planned for him to stay with his father, and so he ended up staying with his grandparents, and I stayed with a friend of mine. And while we were there, then his father got put in jail, and my son was so angry with him, he didn't even want to see him. And I said, well, we're not going to see him for a few more months. Why don't we just see him one more time before we leave? And I said, he's sober a couple of weeks now. And we went and met him at a cafe and had a chocolate shake, and then we left. And 2 days later, we got in our car, and we knew he was loaded again already. And we drove back to Iowa. And I'd rented a cell phone for the trip, just for an emergency. I never used it, but it was plugged into the ashtray, and I remember the phone started ringing. I thought, well, that's kind of weird. So I picked the phone up, and Clancy was on the other end. And he said, where are you, kid? I said, I'm in Parachute, Colorado. He says, I've got some sad news for you. He says, they found John dead yesterday morning. It was a drug overdose. And I'm just driving down the road, and I just thought, my God. So I made it to my brother's house. He lived in Denver. Got on an airplane and came home, and there were AA people. Rita was one of them at the airport when I got there. And we went to the funeral, and my sponsor did part of the eulogy. And there were AA people all over the funeral, and it was a very, very tough period in our lives. And my son, God bless him, he's such a good boy. We were driving in Iowa after we'd come back after the funeral, and sometimes we'd get kind of quiet, we just have quiet time driving, and he says, what are you thinking about, Mom? I said, I'm thinking about myself. And I said, what are you thinking about? He said, well, I was thinking about how much I owe AA. I was thinking, God, he's so incredible, And he memorized the globe when he was like 3.5 years old. At 3.5 years old, he was worrying about the CFC level and the ozone layer. When he was like 6 years old, he was saying his little prayers. He thanked God that he was at the top of the food chain. And when he was about 4 years old, we got into this little conversation. This lady that I sponsored, we were both in inventory at the time, and she was coming over a couple times a week to write. And he asked me, he said, why does Abby keep coming over? I said, Abby and I are writing. I said, what are you writing? I said, we're writing our inventories. And he goes, what's that? I said, well, we're writing out all our problems, and we're going to share them with God and other human beings so they won't be problems anymore. He goes, good idea. I said, yeah, it's mine. And he knows better now, but he's so cute too, because a few days later, we hadn't talked about it since then. It was Wednesday night. His grandparents always picked him up on Wednesday, and I went to the Pacific group meeting. Daniel and I called it the big meeting. There's about this many people where I go every Wednesday night. And he called me from his grandparents' house, and he said, what are you doing, Mom? I said, I'm getting ready for the big meeting. What are you doing? He says, well, I'm getting ready to write. I said, what are you writing? He says, well, I'm going to write my inventory. I said, great, but that's not all you have to do. And then you'll never hear this from the mouth of an alcoholic. He said, what else? I said, well, first of all, you have to see that you have a problem. And you have to know that you can't do anything about it. And then you have to come to believe that there's some power stronger and greater than you that will do something about it or can do something about it. And then you ask that power to do that. Then you write out all your problems that you're going to share with God and a human being. He goes, oh, that's good. I said, yeah, but that's not all either. I said, then you, after you have written them down, you share them with God and a human being, you see clearly what the problems are, and you have to get ready for that power to take them away. You have to be willing for him to do that. And then you ask that power to take them away. He goes, oh, so this is the path to peace. I said, no, there's more. I said, then you have to write out a list of everybody's feelings you hurt because of those problems. And then you have to go find them, and you have to right those wrongs. He goes, oh, that's good. I said, yeah, but that's not all either. I said, then you have to look every single day for new problems, and as they arise, you have to ask God to take care of them right then. I said, that's good. I said, yeah, that's not all either. I said, then you have to laugh and dance and sing and play with God. He goes, oh, I like that one. I said, yeah, that's a good one. I said, but that's not all either. I said, then you have to go find somebody with that same kind of problem, and you have to tell them how God solved that problem. And when you do that, that'll keep those problems out of your life. So he sat there real quiet for a few minutes, and then he said, so what happens is you live in God's life and not yours. Then I asked him to sponsor me. That was a 4.5-year-old. How are you doing? But he's incredible. I'm going to stop shortly, but I just have to tell you, newcomer, that my life is so incredibly good that these steps are designed, I believe, to free us from the past so we can live here in the present. You know, I told you earlier that I was molested, and you know, I'm not one of these people that believes in a lot of issues and boundaries and that kind of stuff. My issue was sobriety. I couldn't stand it. And these steps allow us to go back and clear the wreckage of our past so we can live with who we are. And I realized what happened to me as a girl. You know, there's a part of me that remains unharmed. And that's the part that I developed here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's this minister, I like what he says. He said, the past does not exist except held by the thoughts of my mind. And these steps allow us to get free in our minds so that we can become useful human beings. And Chuck C. used to say, you know, I could not integrate myself into society. And that was me. You know, I just could not make myself fit. I was just so absorbed and so aware of self. And these steps allow us to get freedom, you know, chunks at a time, where I am not consumed by self, you know. They have allowed me to find a way of living that makes alcohol unnecessary. And I had someone ask me at a question and answer meeting a few months ago, you know, they said, what difference did commitment make in your life? Because my group is very action-oriented, and we have commitments, and no one had ever asked me that before, and I hadn't really thought about it. But I realized, and I told them, I said, I realized that there is nothing in my life that I am not committed to. I am committed to every aspect of my life: work, family, my child, school, my friends, my home group, my sponsor. And it allows me to be able to live with these intense emotions. You know, I still have them, but I think the beautiful thing is the book talks about a fourth dimension. And in that fourth dimension, those things don't guide me anymore. That I'm living on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying on an infinite God. And I want to thank you guys for putting me up and inviting me to be out here. I've had a wonderful time, and thank you for my life.